The trucks were already waiting beyond the gate when 32 German prisoners suddenly stopped walking, and what should have been a routine work detail collapsed into complete silence as shovels fell back onto the ground. Guards reached for radios, and a camp captain realized that one refused order had just blocked food deliveries, medical supplies, and fuel shipments, while a message was already being sent to Patton before the prisoners understood how expensive silence could become. The trouble began after sunrise, when a line of German prisoners was marched from the barracks toward a row of waiting army trucks, where shovels, canvas gloves, and road repair tools had been stacked for a work detail outside the wire. The American sergeant called the names from a clipboard, and each prisoner was supposed to step forward, take a tool, and climb into the truck, but the first man in line kept his hands at his sides while the men behind him copied the same stiff posture. The sergeant repeated the order in slower German, then pointed toward a broken supply road that had washed out during the night, because the camp needed that road opened before fuel, bread, and medical crates could reach the storage shed. A camp interpreter hurried from the office and explained that the work was legal, ordinary, and guarded. Yet a former German corporal answered for the line by saying that prisoners of the Wehrmacht would not repair roads for an enemy army. The guards shifted around the trucks, but no rifles were raised, because the captain in charge wanted the refusal handled without panic, and he ordered the prisoners back into formation rather than turning the yard into a shouting match. When the prisoners were counted again, 32 men still refused the detail, while another group of Germans stood apart near the barracks, ready to work but afraid that crossing the line would mark them as traitors in their own camp. The captain tried a practical warning first, and he told them that no work detail meant no truck movement, no extra bread delivery, and no afternoon mail distribution, because the blocked road had already delayed everything connected to the camp. The corporal did not move, and several men behind him lowered their eyes as if the refusal had become heavier than the work itself, while the American clerk wrote every prisoner number on a separate sheet for the provost marshal. By mid-morning, the mess hall crew could not bring in flour. The infirmary wagon waited outside the damaged road, and the same men who had refused the shovels now watched other prisoners whisper angrily because their own comfort had been caught in the protest. The captain sent one final order through the interpreter, then sealed the paper in an envelope marked for 3rd Army Headquarters, because he knew the name at the top of the chain would change the meaning of a camp dispute before the day ended. Are you enjoying this deep dive? Most people don't know this side of the war. If you're one of the few who values true history, subscribe now and help us grow this archive. The reply from headquarters came before the noon meal, and it did not arrive as a letter, because 2 jeeps and a staff car turned through the outer gate with military police on the running boards and dust rolling behind them. A major stepped out first, carrying a leather folder with orders from Patton's staff, and he told the camp captain to separate the refusing prisoners from the rest of the compound before rumor turned one work detail into a full camp challenge. The captain opened the yard gate between the barracks blocks, and the 32 men were moved into the empty recreation enclosure, where benches had been removed and a single water barrel was placed near the fence under guard. The German corporal tried to keep the men together by walking down the line and speaking in a low voice, but the interpreter followed close behind and repeated every sentence aloud, making it clear that no private command would remain private now. The major then ordered the loyal work volunteers to board the trucks first, and the road crew left the compound under guard while the refusing men watched other prisoners take the tools they had rejected and disappear beyond the gate. That movement changed the camp more than any threat, because kitchen prisoners began blaming the holdouts for the missing supplies. Clerks demanded the delayed mail sacks, and the infirmary orderly asked why medicine should wait, because one corporal wanted a stage. The major did not punish them at once, but he canceled the afternoon canteen line for the separated enclosure, removed the soccer ball from the recreation shed, and ordered the prisoner spokesman from other barracks to meet him in the camp office. Inside the office, the spokesmen were shown the written order, the road report, and the list of numbered prisoners, and each man was told that discipline inside the wire would now be judged by whether the prisoners could control their own ranks. Outside, the corporal realized that his refusal was no longer aimed only at Americans, because men from other barracks began calling for the road to be opened and for the medicine wagon to be brought through before fever cases worsened. Late in the afternoon, the work trucks returned with mud on the wheels and half the road cleared, and the volunteers were given water and a small tobacco issue in full view of the enclosure, which made the holdouts argue among themselves for the first time. The major sent a second message to headquarters before dusk, reporting that the refusal had been contained but not broken, and the camp captain understood from the wording that Patton himself might come if the next morning began the same way. The second morning did not begin with another work call, because the refusing prisoners were marched instead to the administration hut, where a field table had been placed beneath the flagpole and 3 American officers waited with the interpreter. Each prisoner was brought forward by number, asked whether he understood the lawful order, and marked on a roster with either a promise to obey or a continued refusal, turning the protest from a crowd gesture into 32 separate records. The first 6 men repeated the corporal's answer, but the 7th asked whether the road detail would carry weapons or ammunition, and when the major said it would carry only gravel, timber, and medical crates, the man stepped to the obedience line. That single movement broke the shape of the group, and the corporal shouted after him until the guards ordered him silent and moved him away from the others, not into a punishment cell, but into the office porch where everyone could see he no longer controlled the line. By the end of the hearing, 19 men had agreed to work, 11 still refused, and 2 claimed sickness, so the doctor examined them beside the infirmary wagon and sent one to bed with a fever while clearing the other for duty. The major then signed the consequence order, and the 11 holdouts were removed from regular barracks privileges, assigned to a fenced utility shed with straw mattresses, and denied canteen purchases until they obeyed the same camp rules as the others. This did not create another dramatic standoff, because the larger conflict moved inside the prisoner population, where barracks leaders demanded that the holdouts stop risking mail, food schedules, and medical deliveries for a gesture that no longer looked brave. During the noon count, a German sergeant from another barracks asked permission to speak, and he told the Americans that many prisoners would take the work detail if they were protected from threats after returning from the road. The camp captain acted on that request at once, moving the volunteers into a different barracks block and assigning 2 prisoner orderlies to record any intimidation, which quietly removed the corporal's last useful weapon against his own men. In the late afternoon, the road crew finished the worst washout, and the first supply truck crossed the repaired stretch with flour sacks, quinine bottles, and letters, while the 11 holdouts saw the whole camp receive what their refusal had nearly delayed. The major sent the final report to Patton with a sharper line at the bottom, stating that the road was open, the camp was divided, and the remaining defiance now came from a small group using prison discipline as a battlefield after the battlefield had already ended. Patton arrived the next morning without a parade, stepping from the staff car before the driver had fully stopped, and the officers around the administration hut straightened as he walked past them toward the fence of the utility enclosure. The 11 holdouts expected shouting, because every rumor about him had turned his name into a weapon, yet he only looked at the repaired road, the supply trucks, the barracks windows, and the small group of prisoners standing apart from the camp they had tried to lead. He asked for the roster, read the numbers, and then surprised the captain by ordering the German barracks spokesman brought forward instead of the holdouts, because he wanted to know which prisoners had kept the camp working while the protest failed. The spokesmen were lined up near the flagpole, and Patton made the interpreter tell them that any man who obeyed lawful camp orders would be protected from prisoner threats, paid according to the rules, and kept on normal rations and mail privileges. Then he turned to the American officers and cut away the measure everyone had expected, because he ordered that no guard was to strike, shove, or humiliate the 11 men, since the army would win the issue by command and records rather than by losing discipline in front of prisoners. That order changed the whole yard, because the Germans had prepared themselves for cruelty they could use as proof. But Patton denied them that proof and forced the dispute back onto the simple question of whether a soldier in captivity would obey a lawful instruction. He then made the major bring out an older, captured German officer from the separate officers' compound, a thin colonel who had been silent for weeks, and placed him beside the interpreter with the written camp order in his hands. The colonel read the work rule in German, added that prisoners could not turn a legal labor detail into a private war, and ordered the 11 men to stop using the honor of the army as cover for disorder that harmed their own wounded and sick. The corporal tried to interrupt, but Patton raised one gloved hand toward the American guards and kept them still, allowing the German colonel to finish without making the Americans appear afraid of a prisoner's voice. When the colonel stepped away, 5 holdouts crossed to the obedience line, and Patton did not congratulate them or look pleased, because he only told the clerk to change their records and send them back to regular barracks under protection. The reversal landed hardest on the corporal, who had expected an American threat and instead received a German command, a written record, and the sight of his own men leaving him without a dramatic scene to hide behind. That night, the final break came from inside the German barracks, not from the American fence, when one of the 5 returned volunteers woke to find his blanket dragged from his bunk and his work gloves nailed to the wall with a kitchen knife. The barracks leader pulled the knife free before the guards entered, but the damage had already been seen by 2 orderlies, and their written statements reached the camp office before the morning count was finished. The captain did not call another work order because the problem had changed again, and he treated the knife as an assault threat inside the prisoner population rather than a protest against the Americans. Military police searched the barracks in sections, emptying straw mattresses, footlockers, and coat pockets onto long tables, while German spokesmen stood nearby to witness the search and prevent claims that evidence had been planted. Behind a loose board near the washroom, a guard found a folded paper with 6 prisoner numbers, including the volunteer whose gloves had been nailed up, and beside it lay a sharpened spoon handle wrapped in cloth. The corporal denied owning the paper, but one of the remaining holdouts pointed to the utility shed and said the list had been passed around after dark because the corporal wanted the volunteers marked before they could return to the work crews. Patton's earlier order now gave the captain a clean path because there was no beating, no public spectacle, and no bargaining, only signed statements, numbered evidence, and a transfer form for prisoners who had threatened camp order from within. The corporal and 2 accomplices were placed in a guarded truck before noon, with their names removed from the regular compound rolls and entered for transfer to a stricter enclosure where they would have no barracks following to command. As the truck waited by the gate, the older German colonel walked past the prisoners without saluting, handed the captain a note naming a new barracks spokesman, and returned to his compound without looking toward the men being taken away. The 6 remaining holdouts watched the gate close behind the truck, then signed the obedience roster in the office one at a time, because the camp had changed beyond repair and no one could pretend the old line still existed. By evening, the work detail formed without speeches. The repaired road carried another supply wagon through the gate, and the volunteer whose gloves had been nailed to the wall received a new pair from the quartermaster before stepping into the truck. The next morning, the yard did not return to normal all at once, but the count moved on time. The trucks rolled through the repaired gate, and the prisoner barracks accepted the new spokesman without a challenge. Patton had not given the holdouts the storm they expected, and that became the part no one forgot. When the last road crew came back at dusk, the captain crossed the corporal's old number from the camp board, closed the ledger, and left an empty space where the loudest man in the compound had once stood. Final check. Hook 445 characters. Chapters 2,000 to 3,000 characters each. Conclusion 530 characters. Chapter 4 contains the major reversal, and Chapter 5 contains the irreversible transfer event. Thank you for spending this time here. If these quiet, true World War II stories matter to you, subscribing helps this channel continue.